Here's something strange about growing potatoes. The entire plant's life happens in a place you cannot see. No leaves to check, no fruit to watch ripen, nothing. Just a green plant on top, and a complete mystery underneath it, until the day you finally dig it up and find out whether you grew 40 pounds of potatoes or 4. So today, we're following one potato, start to finish, through everything that happens in the dark, including the one moment that gets a lot of new growers genuinely worried, and the one thing that, if you get it wrong, can make your harvest actually dangerous to eat. Here's the plan. A seed potato that isn't really a seed at all. A decision about growth habit that determines almost everything that happens next. A long, boring stretch of waiting that's secretly the most important part. A hilling routine you cannot skip. A scare that connects directly to one of the most famous disasters in agricultural history. And finally, a harvest, where we find out, for the first time, what's actually been happening this whole time. Let's get into it. Hey, before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you're growing from. Potatoes behave really differently in a short northern season versus a long, warm southern one, and it genuinely helps to know who's watching this. Okay, here's the first thing that throws people off about potatoes before we even get into the ground. There's no seed. Not in the way every other crop in this series has had one. What you're actually planting is a piece of an existing potato, called a seed potato, either a whole small tuber or a larger one cut into pieces, each piece containing at least 1 or 2 eyes, those small indentations you've definitely seen in a potato that sat in your pantry too long and started sprouting. Each eye is capable of growing into an entirely new plant. So in a very real sense, our potato story doesn't start from scratch. It starts from a piece of its own parent. Before we even plant anything, there's a decision sitting right here that shapes the entire rest of this story, and it's one almost nobody explains clearly. Determinate versus indeterminate growth habit. And no, that's not a typo from our tomato episode. Potatoes genuinely use the same terminology for a completely different reason. Determinate varieties grow their tubers in a single, fairly shallow layer, close to where you planted them, and they mature faster, generally in that first early to second early window, somewhere around 10 to 14 weeks. Indeterminate varieties keep producing tubers upward along the buried stem for as long as you keep covering them with soil, take longer to mature, generally into a main crop timeline of well over 15 weeks, but reward that patience with a noticeably bigger total harvest. This decision matters because it changes literally everything we do for the rest of this video. Determinate varieties mostly just need mulch over that single shallow layer to protect them. Indeterminate varieties need ongoing hilling, repeatedly mounding soil up around the stem as it grows, which we're about to spend a lot of time on, because skipping it is one of the single most common mistakes in this entire crop story. For our story, we're growing an indeterminate variety, since that gives us the clearest version of the hilling chapter that's coming up, and honestly, the bigger potential harvest makes for a better ending. Beyond growth habit, there's also the simple question of which actual potato you're growing, and the differences here go well beyond just color. Russets, the classic baking potato, have thick, rough skin and a dry, starchy interior that turns wonderfully fluffy when baked, but the same dry starchiness that makes them perfect for baking makes them fall apart if you try to boil them for potato salad. Red and yellow skin varieties tend to have a waxier, denser texture that holds together far better when boiled, which is exactly why potato salad recipes almost always call for red or yellow potatoes rather than russets. Fingerlings, small and elongated, often have a particularly rich, nutty flavor and work well roasted whole, skin and all. And then there are the purple and blue varieties, which aren't just a novelty color. That deep purple pigment comes from anthocyanins, the same general family of antioxidant compounds responsible for the color in blueberries and purple cabbage. So beyond looking striking on a plate, they genuinely bring a different nutritional profile to the table compared to a plain russet. None of this changes anything about how you grow the plant itself. The soil, water, and hilling needs are essentially identical across all of these, but it's worth choosing your variety based on what you're actually planning to cook, rather than discovering after a full season of work that you grew an entire bed of dry, starchy russets when what you really wanted was a creamy potato salad. One more decision before we plant. Chitting. This is the practice of letting your seed potato pieces sit somewhere cool and bright for a couple of weeks before planting, which encourages short, sturdy sprouts to develop in advance. It's not strictly required. Plenty of successful potato crops skip it entirely. But in a shorter, colder growing season, it can genuinely buy you 1 to 2 weeks of head start, since the plant isn't starting that sprouting process from zero once it's already in the ground. Think of it as giving your potato a small running start before the actual race begins. Now, into the ground. Cut your seed potato into pieces if it's large, each piece with at least 1 or 2 eyes, and let the cut surfaces dry and callus over for a day or 2 first. Planting a freshly cut piece straight into moist soil is basically inviting rut before the plants even had a chance to start. Plant the pieces about 6 inches deep, eye-side up if you can tell which way is up, spaced roughly 12 inches apart in rows about 2 to 3 feet apart, since indeterminate varieties especially are going to want that room later. Potatoes want loose, well-draining soil more than almost anything else. Heavy, compacted clay soil is genuinely one of the worst environments for a developing tuber, since it physically restricts how the tubers can expand and creates the perfect damp, low-oxygen conditions for several of the problems we're about to walk through. If your soil is heavy, working in compost or aged organic matter before planting isn't optional. It's close to mandatory for a decent harvest. If you don't have a garden bed at all, or your soil situation is genuinely difficult to fix, potatoes happen to be one of the more forgiving crops for container growing. And the logic actually works in your favor here in a way it doesn't for most vegetables. An 8 to 10 gallon grow bag or large container at least 16 inches deep gives a seed potato plenty of room. And the technique mirrors hilling almost exactly. Start with just a few inches of soil at the bottom. Plant your seed piece, and as the plant grows, keep adding more soil or straw on top, layer by layer, rather than mounding it up on the outside the way you would in the ground. By the end of the season, that container is essentially one continuous, contained hill. And when harvest time comes, you get to skip the garden fork entirely and just dump the whole container out to find your potatoes, which is honestly one of the most satisfying harvest experiences in this entire video series. The trade-off is a smaller total yield than an in-ground indeterminate plant given unlimited room to spread. But for a patio, a balcony, or genuinely poor native soil, it's a completely legitimate way to grow this exact same story on a smaller scale. Feed lightly at planting, favoring something low in nitrogen and higher in phosphorus. This is the same lesson we've learned in every episode so far, but it matters even more here. Heavy nitrogen pushes a potato plant into producing lush, impressive foliage above ground while doing almost nothing for the actual tubers forming below. You can have the most beautiful potato plant on the block and pull up disappointingly small potatoes at the end of the season if you got this balance wrong. There's a second feeding moment worth knowing about, timed to a specific stage rather than a specific date. Once the plant starts flowering, that's roughly the same window when tubers are actively beginning to form, and it's worth a side dressing of a potassium-rich fertilizer right around then. Potassium specifically supports the bulking process, the actual swelling and starch accumulation that turns a tiny new tuber into the potato you'll eventually dig up. So this single feeding, timed correctly, often makes a more noticeable difference than any amount of feeding earlier in the season. After that flowering stage, most growers can ease off feeding almost entirely, since the plant's energy from that point forward is going almost exclusively into the tubers rather than new growth, and additional fertilizer mostly just goes to waste. And then, nothing happens. For what feels like an uncomfortably long time, nothing visible happens at all. Somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks after planting, depending on soil temperature, the first small shoots finally break through the surface. This is genuinely the calmest part of our potato's entire story, and it's tempting to just relax here. But there are 2 things worth doing during this quiet stretch that pay off enormously later. First, watch the soil moisture, even though nothing visible is happening yet. The seed piece underground is using stored energy to push that first shoot upward, and inconsistent moisture during this stage, bone dry 1 week, soak the next, can stress the developing plant before it's even properly established, setting up problems that won't actually show themselves until much later in this story. Second, and this is the one almost nobody mentions, if you're in a region with a real risk of a late, unexpected frost, keep an eye on the forecast even after your shoots emerge. A young potato shoot caught by a hard frost can be killed back entirely. Though the genuinely good news is that the seed piece underground often survives and will send up a second attempt, just setting the whole timeline back by a couple of weeks. Frustrating, but rarely fatal to the overall story, just a delay. There's a third thing worth doing during this quiet window too, and it's less about the potato itself and more about everything trying to compete with it. Weeds that establish themselves early, while the potato plant is still small and not yet shading the ground around it, can meaningfully compete for the same water and nutrients we just spent so much time getting right. A light cultivation or hand-weeding pass or two during this stretch, before the plant is large enough to start outcompeting weeds on its own through sheer leaf coverage, genuinely pays off later, and it's far easier to manage weeds now. While the soil is still relatively open and uncrowded, then once hilling is underway and you're trying to weed around an increasingly tall mound of soil without disturbing developing tubers. Once the plant has a solid handful of leaves and stands maybe 6 to 8 inches tall, we arrive at the part of this story that's actually, secretly, the most important chapter in the entire video. Here's the thing about potato plants that makes them genuinely different from everything else we've covered in this series. The tubers don't form on the roots. They form along underground stems, called stolons, that branch out sideways from the main stem you planted. And those stolons keep forming new tubers for as long as there's loose, dark soil available around the stem for them to grow into. Hilling is the process of repeatedly mounding moss soil, or straw, or compost up around the base of the plant as it grows, burying more and more of the lower stem. Every inch of stem you bury becomes new territory where additional stolons, and therefore additional tubers, can form. Skip hilling entirely, and you don't just risk a cosmetic problem, you directly cap how many potatoes this plant can physically produce, because there's simply nowhere for new tubers to grow. The process, once the plant reaches about 6 to 8 inches tall, mounds soil up around the stem, burying roughly half of the visible plant, leaving just the top leaves exposed. 2 to 3 weeks later, once new growth has pushed back up through that mound, repeat the process. Do this 2 to 3 times over the course of the growing season, building up a gentle, sloped hill that can eventually reach 12 to 18 inches tall around the base of a healthy indeterminate plant. And here's the detail that genuinely matters, the one that connects directly to something that can make your harvest unsafe rather than just smaller. Tubers need to stay covered and in complete darkness the entire time they are developing. If a tuber, even partially, pushes up through the soil and gets exposed to sunlight, it starts producing chlorophyll, which is why it turns green. And alongside that chlorophyll, the plant also produces a group of compounds called glycoalkaloids, solanine being the main one. This isn't just an unappetizing cosmetic issue. Glycoalkaloids are genuinely toxic in enough quantity, and they don't break down with cooking. No amount of boiling, baking, or frying removes them once they've formed. A potato that's gone significantly green should have that green portion cut away generously before eating. And if more than about a quarter of the tuber is green, the safest move is just discarding it entirely rather than trying to salvage it. This is exactly why hilling isn't optional busy work. It's the single thing standing between our potato plant producing a normal, safe harvest and producing a pile of green, bitter tubers that aren't safe to eat in any real quantity. Our plant, hilled properly and on schedule, avoids this entirely. Every developing tuber staying buried in the dark exactly where it needs to be. While we're on the subject of what happens underground that you can't see, there's one more issue worth knowing about now, even though you won't actually discover it until harvest day, well past the point you could do anything about it in the moment. Cut open a potato at harvest and occasionally find a strange, star-shaped or irregular hollow cavity right in the center, with no other symptoms anywhere on the outside of the tuber. This is called hollow heart, and it's not a disease, a pest, or a deficiency in the way everything else in this story has been. It's a structural growth disorder, caused by the tuber going through a sudden burst of unusually rapid growth, typically a stretch of dry weather followed abruptly by heavy rain or watering, very similar in spirit to the cracking we talked about back in the tomato episode. The outer tissue of the tuber expands quickly in response to that sudden rush of water, faster than the interior tissue can keep up, and the center essentially tears apart from the inside. It doesn't affect flavor or safety at all. It's purely structural, and larger variety potatoes tend to be more prone to it than smaller ones. The only real prevention is the same theme running through this entire video. Water consistently rather than in dramatic, unpredictable bursts, particularly through that critical period when the tubers are actively bulking up underground. Coming up, a disease so serious it's genuinely changed the course of human history once already. And then a strange surprise waiting at the top of the plant that has nothing to do with potatoes at all, even though it's growing on a potato plant. Midway through the season, on a stretch of unusually warm, humid days, dark, almost greaser-looking spots start appearing on our plant's lower leaves. Within just a few days, they've spread, turning the foliage black and collapsed in places. This is late blight, and it deserves a moment of genuine seriousness because it's not just another garden inconvenience. Late blight, caused by a fungus-like organism called Phytophthora infestans, is the exact disease responsible for the Irish potato famine in the 1840s. At the time, Ireland was overwhelmingly dependent on a single potato variety, the lumper, grown as a genetic clone across an enormous portion of the country's farmland. When this disease arrived, it didn't just damage one farmer's crop. It devastated nearly the entire country's food supply almost simultaneously, because every single plant was genetically identical and equally defenseless against it. Over 1 million people died, and millions more emigrated, an almost unimaginable consequence traced back to a microscopic fungus and a population of crops with zero genetic diversity to fall back on. Modern potato breeding has spent the better part of 2 centuries since then working specifically to avoid that exact vulnerability happening again. Quick detour, since we're already deep in potato history. The potato itself actually originated thousands of miles from Ireland, in the high Andes Mountains of South America, where indigenous farmers cultivated thousands of genetically distinct varieties over thousands of years, specifically because growing many different varieties side by side meant that if a disease or a bad season wiped out one type, others would likely survive. That genetic diversity is precisely what Ireland lacked centuries later, when a single imported variety became the foundation of an entire nation's food supply. Some of that original Andean genetic diversity survives today specifically because seed banks and small Andean farming communities have deliberately preserved it, partly as a direct safeguard against exactly the kind of catastrophe that happened in Ireland ever repeating at that scale again. Back to our garden. Here in our story, the stakes are obviously much smaller, but the biology is identical. The disease spread fastest when there have been at least 2 consecutive days above 50 degrees combined with several hours of high humidity, conditions that, uncomfortably, describe a pretty normal humid summer week in a lot of places. Spores from infected foliage wash down through the soil during rain and can infect the tubers directly, turning what looked like a foliage problem into a tuber problem within the same week. The response here genuinely matters, and speed is everything. If you spot blight early, removing and destroying the affected foliage immediately, never composting it, since the spores can survive and spread from compost, can sometimes save the rest of the planting. If it's already spread significantly, the safest move is often to cut down and remove all the foliage from the affected plants entirely, then leave the tubers undisturbed in the ground for a couple of additional weeks before harvesting, which gives any spores on the soil surface time to die off before you dig and potentially drag infected soil onto otherwise healthy tubers. Our plant catches a mild case, just a few lower leaves, and because we're checking regularly and remove the affected foliage immediately, it doesn't spread any further. Not every story in every garden ends this cleanly. This is genuinely the most serious threat in the entire potato-growing world, but vigilance and a fast response are what separate a contained problem from a real loss. While we're in the disease neighborhood, briefly, common scab shows up as rough, corky patches on the tuber skin, caused by a soil bacterium that thrives specifically when the soil is too dry during the weeks right after tubers start forming. It's purely cosmetic, genuinely safe to eat once peeled. The texture's just unpleasant. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Keep the soil consistently moist, specifically during that tube initiation window, and the risk drops dramatically. Two more worth knowing, since they show up differently from anything else in this story. Verticillium wilt is a soil-borne fungal disease that, unlike blight, doesn't announce itself with dramatic, visible leaf spots at all. Instead, it causes a gradual yellowing and wilting that often shows up on just one side of the plant first, and the real damage happens invisibly inside the tuber, a light brown discoloration through the vascular tissue that you won't see until you actually cut one open. There's no cure once a plant has it, and because it survives in the soil for years, the only real defense is a long crop rotation, ideally avoiding potatoes and their nightshade relatives in that exact spot for several years, plus choosing resistant varieties where they are available. Blackleg is a bacterial disease that shows up fast and looks dramatic. Blackened, rotting tissue right at the base of the stem, paired with stunted, pale, yellowing growth above it. It tends to start from infected seed pieces, which is exactly why buying certified, disease-free seed potatoes rather than planting a sprouted grocery store potato matters more than it might seem. It sounds like a small, fussy distinction, paying a bit more for certified seed potatoes versus just using one that sprouted in your pantry. But it genuinely closes off one of the most common entry points for several of the diseases in this entire video, blackleg very much included. And the Colorado potato beetle, a yellow and black striped insect that can defoliate a plant surprisingly fast if left unchecked, is best handled the old-fashioned way for a home garden, hand-picking the beetles and their distinctive orange egg clusters off the undersides of leaves before the population gets out of hand. Here's a genuinely strange moment that happens to a fair number of potato growers, usually mid to late season, and it tends to cause a moment of real confusion the first time you see it. Small, round, green fruits, sometimes a little bigger than a cherry tomato, appear up at the top of the plant where the flowers were. And the instinctive assumption almost everyone has is the same. Did a tomato seed somehow get in here? Did this cross-pollinate with a tomato plant somewhere nearby? Neither. These are the potato plant's actual fruit, the genuine botanical fruit of the plant, produced the exact same way a tomato or pepper produces fruit, from a pollinated flower. It makes perfect sense once you remember that potatoes, tomatoes, and peppers are all in the same plant family, the nightshades, so structurally similar fruit isn't actually that surprising. What is surprising is that almost nobody eats them, and for good reason. These little potato berries are loaded with the same glycoalkaloids we talked about with green tubers, just concentrated even further, and they are not something you want to experiment with eating. Here's the part that genuinely surprised researchers for a long time, and honestly still feels a little strange to say out loud. Each one of those small green berries contains real, viable potato seeds. True seeds, not the seed pieces we planted at the start of this story. In theory, you could grow an entirely new potato plant from one of those seeds rather than from a piece of tuber. In practice, almost nobody does this on purpose, because a potato grown from true seed doesn't reliably produce the same variety as its parent plant. The genetics shuffle in a way that vegetative propagation from a tuber piece simply doesn't allow. This is actually exactly how professional plant breeders create entirely new potato varieties in the first place, deliberately growing out true seed from controlled crosses to find new combinations of traits, which is a fairly direct echo of how Andean farmers, all those centuries ago, ended up with thousands of distinct varieties to begin with. Some growers treat the appearance of these berries as a loose, secondary signal that the plant is moving into its final stretch, though the foliage itself, which we're about to get to, is the far more reliable signal for when to actually harvest. Either way, if you spot these on your own plant, now you know exactly what they are and exactly why they are staying on the plant, not on your dinner plate. This is the part of growing potatoes that requires a genuine mental shift from almost every other crop we've covered, because the signal you're watching for has nothing to do with the actual tubers, since you can't see them, and everything to do with what's happening above ground. As the season progresses toward harvest, the foliage naturally starts yellowing and dying back, beginning at the base of the plant and working upward. This isn't a problem. It's the plant winding down on its own schedule, redirecting its remaining energy into the tubers underground rather than maintaining leaves it no longer needs. For early and second early varieties especially, you have a choice here worth understanding clearly. You can dig a few tubers early, while the foliage is still mostly green and lush, for smaller, thinner-skinned new potatoes with a more delicate flavor, or wait for fuller foliage dieback for larger, thicker-skinned tubers better suited to long storage. This early harvest option is genuinely worth a moment of its own, because it produces something meaningfully different from what most people picture when they think of a potato. New potatoes, dug deliberately early before full maturity, have thin, almost papery skin that doesn't need peeling, a noticeably waxier texture once cooked rather than fluffy, and a sweeter, more delicate flavor than a fully mature tuber. They are genuinely a different culinary experience, often boiled whole and tossed simply with butter and herbs rather than baked or mashed, since their texture doesn't lend itself to the starchy fluffiness people expect from a baked potato. The trade-off, predictably, is that new potatoes don't store well at all. That thin skin that makes them so pleasant to eat fresh also makes them bruise and spoil within just a week or two. So this is a harvest and eat soon situation, not a stock the pantry one. If you've got the patience to wait for full dieback instead, you get the thicker-skinned, longest-storing main crop tubers that are what most people actually picture when they think of a potato in the first place. And that's the path we're following for the bulk of our story here. For our indeterminate main crop variety, the real signal is full dieback, the foliage substantially yellowed and collapsed. Once that happens, there's actually a strategic reason to wait an additional 1 to 2 weeks before digging anything up at all. Beyond the obvious thing of letting the tubers reach their full size, this waiting period also lets the tuber skins toughen and cure while still in the ground, which dramatically improves how well they'll store afterward. Dig too early, and you get tubers with thin, fragile skin that bruises and rots quickly in storage, no matter how careful you are afterward. When harvest day finally comes, this is genuinely the payoff moment for this entire story, the one point where we finally get to see what's actually been happening underground this whole time. Use a garden fork, inserted well outside the visible hill to avoid stabbing straight through tubers you can't see, and lift the soil gently rather than digging straight down. Work outward from the center, since tubers can have spread further than you'd expect, especially from a well-heeled indeterminate plant that's had the whole season to expand sideways. Pick a dry day for this if you possibly can. Digging in wet, heavy soil makes the whole process messier, increases the odds of accidentally bruising or puncturing tubers with the fork, and wet soil clinging to freshly dug potatoes actually encourages rot during the curing process that follows. If rain is forecast for the next several days, it's genuinely worth waiting for a drier window rather than rushing the harvest, assuming your tubers aren't actively at risk from advancing blight or some other pressing issue we've already covered. Once you've lifted the first few tubers, resist the urge to assume you've found them all and move on. This is the single most common way people leave a meaningful portion of their harvest in the ground entirely. Indeterminate varieties especially can have tubers scattered in a surprisingly wide radius around the original hill, sometimes 8 to 12 inches out in any direction, and a quick, careful sweep through the surrounding soil by hand after the main fork work is done routinely turns up several more tubers that would otherwise just get left behind, eventually sprouting on their own the following spring as an unplanned volunteer plant in whatever you grow there next. Handle freshly dug potatoes carefully, since their skin is at its most fragile right at harvest, before curing toughens it up. Avoid washing them immediately if you're planning to store rather than eat them right away. That thin layer of soil actually helps protect the skin during storage, and a quick brush off is enough for now. For storage, cure your harvested potatoes in a cool, dark, well-ventilated spot for about a week or two before moving them to long-term storage, which allows minor skin wound from harvest to heal over and toughens the skin further. After curing, store them in complete darkness, ideally around 40 degrees, with good airflow, never sealed in plastic. And one specific thing worth remembering from earlier in this story, never store potatoes near apples or other fruit, since the ethylene gas those fruits release actively encourages potatoes to sprout early in storage, undoing a lot of the work that went into curing them properly in the first place. There's a temperature detail worth knowing on the colder end too, since it surprises people in the opposite direction from sprouting. Potatoes stored below about 40 degrees can develop an unexpectedly sweet taste because the plant starch-to-sugar conversion process actually outpaces its respiration rate at that temperature, and sugar quietly accumulates in tissue that's supposed to taste starchy, not sweet. If you've ever pulled potatoes out of an overly cold storage spot and been confused by the flavor, that's exactly what happened. The fix, if it's already occurred, is simply letting the potatoes sit at room temperature for about a week, which generally reverses most of that sweetness and brings the flavor back to normal. Though this trick doesn't work equally well on every variety. Worth a quick word on what to actually plant near potatoes too, since by now you've probably noticed every crop in this series circles back to this eventually. Beans and other legumes work well nearby, fixing nitrogen into the soil in a way that benefits the potato without overloading it directly, and the same low nitrogen needs logic we covered earlier means potatoes don't compete with that nitrogen the way a heavy feeder would. Marigolds, intercrop through a potato bed, have some genuine evidence behind repelling certain nematodes in the immediate root zone, similar to what we discussed with companion planting in earlier episodes. What's worth actively avoiding is planting potatoes anywhere near tomatoes, peppers, or eggplant, and not just for the obvious reason that they are all nightshades competing for similar nutrients, but because they are all vulnerable to several of the exact same diseases we just spent half this video discussing, blight chief among them. Planting them side by side doesn't just risk one crop's problem, it risks creating a shared outbreak that spreads between both at once. So that's the full story. A seed piece that wasn't really a seed, a growth habit decision that shaped everything downstream, a quiet underground weight that mattered more than it looked, a healing routine that's the actual difference between a safe harvest and a genuinely toxic one, a disease with a body count attached to its history, a strange little fruit that has nothing to do with the vegetable it's growing on, and finally, a harvest that answers the one question this entire video has been building toward: what was actually happening down there the whole time? There's something genuinely fitting about ending a potato's story this way, with the actual reveal happening only at the very last moment. Every other crop in this series gives you some kind of running feedback throughout the season, leaves telling you what's wrong, fruit visibly ripening or not, flowers opening on a schedule you can watch happen in real time. Potatoes give you almost none of that. You make every important decision, growth habit, spacing, hilling schedule, watering consistency, weeks or months before you have any real evidence of whether those decisions were good ones. The entire crop is essentially an exercise in trusting a process you can't directly observe, and then, on one single day, finding out all at once whether that trust was well placed. That's either the most stressful or the most satisfying way to grow a vegetable, depending entirely on how the digging goes. If you've made it this far, you clearly want to understand what you're growing, not just follow steps blindly. Subscribe, because we've still got plenty of this season left to dig through together. Next time, we're doing this same complete breakdown for garlic, and unlike potatoes, that story actually requires the cold to even begin.